For most of my life, I've enjoyed cooking and sharing food with the people I love. Cooking is a way to spend time with yourself and others while creating tasty food from mundane ingredients. In the past 2 years, I started playing D&D with friends and fell in love with the storytelling and immersion that the game creates. I recently had the idea to just combine the two and create and follow fantasy-inspired recipes to share with those I love. To start, I'll be trying recipes from Heroes Feast, the official D&D cookbook. And who knows, maybe I'll create some recipes and we can try them out together. Take out your copy of Heroes Feast and turn to page 31 for some Yawning Portal buttermilk biscuits. These are flaky American-style biscuits that would help you get ready for a day of adventuring. Let's get started. Alright, to get these biscuits going, we have 3.5 cups of all-purpose flour, and we're going to add 1.5 teaspoons of baking powder, half a teaspoon of baking soda, 1.25 teaspoons of kosher salt, and 1.5 teaspoons of sugar. Now we're going to mix these together to make sure they're well incorporated. Now we have about 10 tablespoons of butter that's been chilled and cut into about 1/2-inch cubes. You want to make sure that your butter is chilled, that way we get nice and flaky layers in our biscuits. Toss these cubes of butter in the dry mixture just to make sure that nothing sticks together. After it's been well coated in flour, go in with your hands and squeeze the butter in between your fingers to try and flatten it out. The goal here is to create some individual layers of butter, that way in the oven it will melt and make some nice good flaky biscuits. If you have a pastry cutter, this will actually work a little bit better, but for now I'm just using my hands. The goal here is to get the butter to be about the size of a small pea. At this point, I realized that I forgot to turn on my oven, so make sure you set your oven to a screaming 450 degrees Fahrenheit. Be careful not to mix too much. If your hands are naturally warm, they could actually cause the butter to melt, and you won't get nice individual layers that we want. The last ingredient that we're going to be adding is 1 2/3 cup of buttermilk. This has been chilled in the fridge, and it's going to add a nice tang and even some softness to our biscuits. After you have the buttermilk in, now it's time to mix. The goal here is not really to develop gluten as much as it is to make sure that everything is well incorporated and there's no dry spots. Make sure you also spill a little bit of flour on the board and on your apron just to make sure that people know that you were baking today. After a little bit, it got kind of hard to mix with the wooden spoon, so I just moved to mixing with my hands. Remember, the goal here isn't necessarily to develop gluten as much as it is to make sure everything is well incorporated and there aren't any dry spots. Now, the recipe calls for an 8-inch square baking pan. I don't have one of those, but I do have a sheet tray, so we'll just use that. Spray everything down well, that way nothing sticks. Now I'm going to use my hands to smush it down into the pan. Try and spread it out as much as you can, that way everything bakes evenly. Alright, so now it's time to divide. Take a bench scraper and divide the dough into 9 equal pieces. These are going to be some big biscuits. Now it's time to put them in the oven for about 30 minutes or until golden brown. 30-ish minutes later, and here they are. Get a little bit of butter and rub it on top of the biscuits so it melts and makes them nice and soft. When I pulled these out of the oven, I had the idea to make some country-style gravy. So let's raid the freezer and see what we can do. Now, ideally for this type of gravy, you would have some ground breakfast sausage. All I had was some brown and serve sausage patties, but we can try and chop them up and maybe it'll work. Now, white gravy is a traditional bechamel sauce, so to do that we're going to make a roux. Start with adding equal parts butter and flour into a pan. I added a little bit more flour than I should have, so off camera I added some oil. to thin it out and get the consistency that I'm looking for. The last step to making a bechamel sauce is the milk. So a little bit at a time, I'm going to add some milk to the roux and mix it in and incorporate it just to not overwhelm the flour and butter and make sure everything dissolves. Keep adding milk a little by little until you get a nice, smooth, and glossy consistency. Off camera, I chopped up the sausage and mixed it into the gravy. Make sure that you salt and pepper your sauce and taste it before it goes onto the biscuits. All that's left to do before breakfast is to make a little coffee. And here they are, the Yawning Portal Buttermilk Biscuits. Top it with gravy or some jam, and you have a fantastic breakfast. If you like this recipe and want to see more, consider subscribing and send these to your friends. Give these biscuits a try, and stay safe out there.